Good morning. Welcome to week 3 of our small group devotionals. Again, as I've said before, if you're not in a small group, still by all means watch the video and see what you get out of it. I don't know about you, but I frequently talk to myself, so you can have your own discussion at the times when it's appropriate during the video. So right now I'll put up the scriptures. I'll remind you that we're working through the lectionary so that the scriptures have something in common with what we're going to be doing on Sunday. So today we're going to be reading from Exodus. We're going to be reading about the Ten Commandments. So I'll put those up on the screen and pause for a moment so that you can take some time and read them. All right, so now we've had the time to go over the 10. They should all be familiar to us, although not everybody can rattle off the 10 Commandments. You'll notice, first of all, that there's basically 2 sections. The first 4 laws, they really deal with our relationship with God. And then the 6 that follow have to do with how we're going to live with one another, how we relate to each other. And one thing that strikes me about these laws is that they really are pretty universal. They're not just Christian laws, and in fact, they're not Christian at all, right? They come out of Judaism. But the laws themselves, across cultures, we can pretty much agree that this is a good way to live. And even if we're atheists, we can actually agree on these laws to for the most part anyway. So we start with the first one. I'm the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. That one's pretty much a given. And again, even if you're outside of the faith, God would be your higher power, whatever that is, but it's your highest orienting ideal. So it's that goal that sets purpose and direction in your life. So for us, it's the person of God the Father. Maybe for other people it might be something different. But as a good first principle, whatever that highest ideal is in your life, you set it above all others, and that's the thing that gives you your purpose. It gives you your direction. The next one, don't make yourself an idol. Well, of course, we don't worship dead things. We don't worship created things. They're not an ideal. They're not transcendent. They're just physical things. Of course, we don't worship them. Don't use the Lord's name in vain. So that's, again, we don't disrespect God. If God is our highest focus, our highest purpose, then if we use his name in vain, we're deriding our own ideal. When you rip down your own ideal, what have you got left? There's nothing, right? And then Sabbath is the last of the 4 God-oriented laws. And all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy. I think we've heard that before. And we know what happens after that. So we set aside time for contemplation, enjoyment, and refocusing. So that's all a given. The next 6 are even more universal. Honor your mother and father. So those people who gave you life and who spent a lot of time raising you, even if they did so imperfectly, which we all do, honor them, of course. Don't murder. No adultery. The family is our basic building block of society, right? So of course we don't break up families just for momentary pleasure, right? It makes no sense. It's bad for everybody. Don't steal, don't lie. And then don't envy, don't covet. So we don't sit around looking at what other people have and making designs on how we're going to get it for ourselves. Rather, we enjoy the success of other people and we work hard to attain our own success. So otherwise, envy really just builds resentment. It's only a destructive force. Nothing can come out of it that's good. So that's a quick recap of the laws. And as I said before, they're laws I think that we can all agree on. They seem to be behaviors that are larger than just our own local place and time. And I don't think that any reasonable person could make a case and say that these laws are inappropriate or wrong. So then the question becomes, if these laws are so obvious and so universal, why does God feel the need to codify them, to write them down step by step and spell things out for us? And why is it so bloody hard for us to actually follow them? Now, I'd like to pose some questions for you to discuss within your groups. So feel free to pause at any time when I'm speaking, or you can just watch through and then come back to those questions that catch your attention. So the first question would be, is fulfilling the law a requirement of gaining God's favor? Does God only love us when we obey his rules? The next question would be, what happens when God's law is broken? Who suffers? Does God suffer? Do we suffer? Do other people suffer? Does the planet herself suffer? Our next question would be, what happens after we've broken a commandment? Are we simply done for? Is there any way back? Is there any way of recovering, of reconciling? What happens to us after we break a commandment? And then another question is, what can we learn from other parts of the Bible? Now, Romans 3, verse 19 and 20 is a good one, as is Matthew 22, verses 36 to 40. 1 Corinthians, I quite like this one, 1 Corinthians 10, verse 23. Two others that are worth looking at, Romans 13, 8, and Galatians 5, 22 to 23. And I'm going to throw these ones up on the screen if you want to pause and have a look at some of these. Other questions would be, is following the law a requirement of faith? Does faith flow out of following the law? Or does following the law flow out of faith? How does that relationship work? And then one other thing to think about is when God called Abraham, he declared that Abraham and his offspring would be a blessing to all the nations. That God's people were going to be a light in the darkness. They'd be a city on a hill. They'd be an example and a testament of goodness and a testament of God that the entire world would see. Does the law help us in this role? So now, as we conclude, there's one thing I'd like to talk about for a moment, and that's the relationship between law and love. And often we take these two things and we put them in opposition or in conflict, as though we are either lawful or we are loving, but we cannot be both. But what if it's the case that these two things actually do go together? Is being lawful equivalent to being loving? If we go back to that most famous verse in John 3, that God so loved the world, then what that means is that God loves you, but God also loves your neighbor. And therefore, we ought not to lie to our neighbors or cheat our neighbors or certainly not kill them. That's generally not considered to be loving behavior. Now, the law guides us in our right relationships, and it sets the groundwork for us to learn how to love our neighbors. And then if we come at it from the other way, is it really possible to love without the law? And I find that this is a little bit more complicated. I frequently hear, especially in the last few years, that all we need to do is love each other. And I agree with that thought, that that's certainly true. But I think perhaps that we and the world might have some different concepts of what it means to actually love. Because these days we conflate love and affirmation. We put them together as though they are the same thing. And in fact, they're not. We think that to love somebody means that we have to automatically affirm and support whatever it is that they do, whatever it is that they think. And I think this may be well-intentioned, but it's misguided. And in fact, worse than just simply misguided, it can actually be dangerous. If we truly love somebody, we also have to set some kind of guidelines and boundaries for their benefit and also for the benefit of those around them. Everybody who's a parent has learned this. Just because you love your child does not mean that you cave into every single desire that they have. That's not good for the child. And if you love your child, you're actually going to set those boundaries. So there's a relationship between love and law. They are bound together. They're not so much in opposition to each other as they are complementary, so two sides to the same coin or something like that. Because each alone doesn't really stand. The law without love is simply cruel and arbitrary. And love without law is amorphous and actually can create conflict and harm. But the most important thing I think that I've learned about that relationship between law and love is this. As each one of us tries to follow the law, and fail, which we always do, it teaches us that we're fallible human beings, that we're in need of grace, we're in need of forgiveness. And that's a really important lesson for us to learn. But it shouldn't stop there. That if we are in need of grace and forgiveness, then so too is every other person in our lives. And they too are people who, like us, are generally loving and kind, and yet they fail and they fall. They're also in need of grace and forgiveness, just like us. And not just from God. They're also needing it from us as well. We too need to forgive them, because we are the image bearers of God, right? We're that light in the darkness. We're the city on the hill. So this law teaches us that although we think of the law as something that divides us, right? It's I'm better than the other person because they do this and I don't. The law actually, when we properly understand it, it's the great equalizer. It brings us all together as a people who are collectively trying, failing, but then forgiving and trying again. The law is not distinct from love. The law is bound up in love. So when we realize our own failings, as we have our own conflict with the law or struggle with the law, we recognize that same thing is happening for other people. They need forgiveness. And as we forgive, we learn to love.